All right. Hello again. Welcome, welcome. This is the session on clean transportation on tribal lands, understanding unique challenges and opportunities. My name is Joel Espino. I'm with the WEN Collective, and I'm the moderator for this session. And in terms of the flow for our time together, I'll moderate the conversation today, and we'll start with some of the questions of my own, and then we'll go to audience questions at about the 45-minute mark. So please do drop your questions in the Q&A tab, which I think is found on the right side of your interface there. And yes, excited for this panel. It's a very important panel because what we know is that in many instances, Native perspective and Indigenous perspectives have been left out of discussions, right, related to transportation electrification. And so it's critical in terms of understanding the opportunities and unique challenges in these contexts. It's crucial for expanding access to clean transportation for all communities. So I invite my fellow panelists to turn on your cameras, and we'll get into a little bit of some intros here. Hi, Craig, Jennifer, and Shayna. Can y'all hear me?
I can. Hi, Joel.
Yes.
Great. So I thought we'd start with, allowing you all to introduce yourselves and share a little bit about yourself and your roles, and we'll kind of go around the horn here, and then we'll get into some more structured questions. So why don't we start with you, Craig, and then we'll go to Shayna and then Jennifer.
Sure. Hey, good afternoon and good morning to many of you. My name is Craig Creeman. I'm with the Quapaw Nation. We're located up here in Northeast Oklahoma. I've been the environmental director here for about 2 months now. I was previously here with the environmental office as served in the capacity as their environmental engineer. Air, water, Superfund, you name it. There's a large Superfund site within Quapaw's reservation. It's the Tar Creek Superfund site. So a lot of work within sort of that realm of work. But I'm also serve on the National Tribal Air Association as the Region 6. So EPA Region 6 is representative to the NTA's executive committee. And with that, I serve as the lead facilitator or the lead on the mobile sources work group. And we meet monthly, and it's free for any tribe to join and talk mobile source issues on tribal land. We invite EPA on the call for guidance, policy, up and coming work that's being done, all across the country. New rules. We have industry when they can come on. We've met with other states, locals, and then we also make a standing, agenda item for any tribe that wants to bring issues they're facing to the call, to where we could, get them in touch with maybe, someone that could help, network, further kind of broaden our horizon in the issues of mobile sources. So that's quick with my introduction, and I will. I'm looking down and I'm seeing Shayna, so I'll turn it over to Shayna for hers.
Thank you, Craig. My name is Shayna Oliver. I am a tribal affiliate of the Navajo Nation, but I do consider myself as descendant survivor of the genocide that goes by many names by many tribes. For me, I think it really has the correlation with the Indian Removal Act that has the impact on tribal communities, which, like, to my people, it was the Long Walk of the Navajo, which that name is controversial too. But I am a mother, wife, and I have 4 children. And I've been working with Moms Clean Air Force as a field organizer, advocating for Indigenous people's rights and for acknowledgement. In Colorado, I am the field organizer for the Colorado chapter with Moms Clean Air Force, working with Eco Madres as well, working with the Latino community here in North Denver. We have a refinery here that impacts our air quality. And as well being Indigenous, we have a lot of issues with mobility, and my work with Moms Clean Air Force has been really creative and just really trying to boost that inclusion of Indigenous acknowledgement. And we've been also fortunate to partner up with the National Tribal Air Association that Craig mentioned. It's really been really influencing of the amount of work that tribes are already doing with climate action. And through my work, I want to highlight what Indigenous people and communities and tribes are already doing for climate action, and having that their voice acknowledged at the government level, and truly pushing for that government to government relationship. So thank you for allowing me to be on this panel, and I'll hand it off to Jennifer.
Hi, thank you guys. Good afternoon. I apologize for the technical difficulties. I feel like now that we're doing everything virtual, it's like aged me 10 years. Like I've turned into my mother. You've all seen the Progressive commercials. I feel like that's me with all the technology. But then there was like a DJ at this conference, and I was like, am I like winning cool points because there's a DJ? I don't know. But that was really fun. Whoever had that idea, I love that. But hello, I'm Jennifer Ryer. I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. I work for the Muskogee Nation as an environmental specialist. I've kind of started my journey about 5 years ago with the tribe, and I have really been fortunate to have such positive administration and support for our projects. I started working with NTAA, won the Volkswagen settlement, and that kind of brought me into the EV world. We've really enjoyed working with them and ITAP, but we have had some really successful partnerships with the Tulsa Clean Cities organization. I kind of saw some other clean city partnerships on the conference, so it was fun to get to see what everyone else is doing in their part of the world too. But yeah, so I'm thankful to be here. It's been an amazing conference so far. I really enjoyed everyone's presentations.
Great. Thank you all again for joining us. It's really an honor to have you all here share your expertise with us. And maybe kind of just start with kind of trying to understand a little bit of the tech around some of the equity issues that the communities they all work in face. And so just wanting to go around the horn again here in terms of y'all work with and for specific Native communities. It sounds like there's some.
Joel, you're having a little bit of feedback issues or something.
Okay, is it? Let's see. Why don't I just tee up the question, and I'll try to work on my audio issue there.
Yeah.
But basically, please talk a little bit about the equity issues in your communities, and I'll work on my audio. We can start with everyone's go first.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll take it. I'll take it away, and I'll probably be quick. But I know both Shannon and Jennifer have a lot of similar points to talk to. Where they're working, and a lot of it's reflective across Indian country. In respects to issues and transportation mobility issues for tribes and in general, and then that looking towards clean transport, EVs. A lot of the tribes here in Region 6, and then hearing from my other regional counterparts on the NTAA, we've got a lot of rural settings, a lot of tribes that are in very remote rural areas. If they're having to transport themselves to work, for some job they're working, in another town, their mode of transport is typically a car that they can afford and buy, outright, not have to do payment plans, afford, month-to-month payments. So, them getting and mobilizing themselves, on fixed incomes, clean transportation is a long ways off in a lot of people's minds. In Indian country, a lot of, when we talk to, clean transportation, yeah, it's great. We want to go that way, but we've got to see some incentive. We got to see some sort of grant we've got to have the tribal leaders motivated. They've got to know those contacts that can help generate interest and funding and dollars this way. The Volkswagen settlement was very substantial to the tribes that had the resources and getting the beneficiaries in place, their documentation in place, good work in response to, identifying those fleets or those needs within their tribes, and then doing a mitigation project. And so it typically looked at retrofitting or replacing, fleets at tribal areas, but not those specific, individuals. There's a lot to go. There's a long ways to go, trying to talk about someone affording a new car that's $40,000. We can't do that here. We can't do that now. There needs to be, means. There needs to be some sort of incentive. Hey, if the leadership is, looking to go that way, well, we need help. And I think a lot of these tribes can go there. It's just, again, a lot of help. The infrastructure, we're talking about infrastructure bills. It needs to come to rural Indian country. It needs to. I mean, that's where broadband needs. We need more. These school kids need, broadband internet to be able to do their schoolwork. So same as that infrastructure. The infrastructure is going to be built for broadband. Build it for EV infrastructure, and then that's where things can start. Until we have that infrastructure. Even talking about, affording or buying or looking to rent or share a clean transportation. That's kind of out of the cards for now. Shana can talk to, Navajo Nation so large, there's people traveling to work 3 hours away. They get on a bus and they sit there, until they get to work. A lot of that stuff in clean transportation, there's just a long ways to go. And there's a lot of people I know that are here to help. There's going to be a lot of work to come. But I think there's a lot of hope and promise and curiosity by a lot of tribes in going that way. There needs to be some incentive, some programs in place. If this infrastructure bill is going to do some work, it needs to come out here in Indian country and do just that. Not focus, just primarily in one state or one urban area. It needs to look at everything, a comprehensive approach to, helping all those that are transporting themselves for work, for life, for families, those needs. So we're excited for things to come. The NTA and the executive committee again is kind of a lot of tribes' outreach, and we have sort of at times pick up on those needs of tribes. We're actually doing a air quality needs assessment right now. We're trying to reach out to every tribe across the country and seeing what their needs are in perspective of air quality. What are their issues out there in Indian country respective to air quality issues, and that could be mobile sources, impacts from the coal industry, from various industries. We're asking tribes to fill out this needs assessment so we can then better get a better understanding of those, and we can then go and help that cause, going to Washington, D.C. and talking to EPA and other agencies, to try and help where we can on behalf of tribes for air. I think that covers kind of mine. I'm gonna, Shana or Jennifer, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Craig, for really touching on that. I think for same thing. It's distances. I grew up with my dad working in Albuquerque and us living in Farmington. I grew up with us living in Farmington or Shiprock, bouncing around like that, and then my dad working in Denver, or working in Phoenix, or working in somewhere in the borders of Arizona and Nevada. So, like that's what in Native life, that's what our families go through, having long distance relationships with our families, even living away from tribal lands. You're still a good amount of distance away from seeing your family, especially like during these holidays. It's a lot to ask for Indigenous tribes to travel or have breaks when you don't have the funding to fund those things. And like Craig said, like there needs to be incentive funding. Rebates are not a solution for like low income people, especially tribes that are live off below the poverty wage income amount. And if tribes were given funds to fund these things, then it would be possible to fund these infrastructures for EV. But not only that, we still have problems at the big city level. I was reading an article about California, about people building their infrastructure for solar on their house, and they're unable to tap their solar equipment into the grid because the transformers are not up to date. Like we can't continue using outdated utility transformers to store in or carry that energy from solar. So like Craig said, we're still a long ways from like infrastructure on top of that, because we have all these other issues. We got to deal with what our old industry is leaving us, and the lack of transition it's able to do for us with that old technology, carrying the energy for renewables and EVs. Because a lot of these EV stations are still hooked up to a power grid, but is not being powered by renewable energy. So that's another big issue. And the distance for communities to travel is a big weight on our communities to be able to have access. And in rural areas, you don't really have public transportation either. And those public transportations are not EV either. And with rural communities, as well as tribal communities, we use trucks. We have to utilize trucks because we don't have paved roads. We have to, like, if we're visiting family, there's probably not a paved road to go visit them. But our solution is not to create roads everywhere. I mean, that's not the solution either. But for rural people, we utilize trucks. So that's the big obstacle challenge there, is how are you going to get rural people to transition their trucks to being EV? And can you create an EV truck that does all the work that rural people need to do in their communities? Because in rural areas, you haul wood, you got to prepare for the winter. You go a long distance to go hunting. None of those things are different from pre-colonialism, that you go these distances to gather your resources for like the winter harvesting. A lot of these things are not new, so our needs have not changed as humans. But transportation has been the big game changer for our communities, that advanced us so much that we threw time forward more than we could acknowledge what it was going to devastate our communities with. So with the more that we advance in transportation, we neglected a lot of other things, like the harm that comes from these extractive resources that we continue to rely on, and that there has to be policy change. We need to have subsidies for these programs. Subsidies need to be reduced to those fossil energy programs that have been utilizing subsidies to uphold their programs, which we need federal policy to change a lot of these environmental policies that harm our communities. And for EV transportation, it's just going to have to take subsidies in grants, because rebates is not a solution for tribes or low-income rural communities. They are resilient community members already. For if you're able to survive on a rural community and never leave, that's really resilient, because not many people are able to do that, and not every family is able to remain where they're at. And a lot of our rural communities are being reduced because they have to go to these areas where there is easily transportation to go to work and easy transportation for people to go to school. So a lot of the things we need to account for is our needs base. And just like Craig was talking about, the needs-based program that the NTAA has created and provided to tribes, I think that's a good network of solutions there to start tapping into in listening to tribes and acknowledging those voices in those communities. But we are such a long ways. If we haven't, our biggest challenge is going to be how are we going to have rural communities utilize EV, and as well as how will we get our utilities updated for those renewable programs that we need. And the transformers, those need to be changed, because it's redundant that we're talking about EV, yet the charging stations are still fueled by fossil fuels. So those are some of the things I think about our challenges in the Native community. I'll have Jennifer, she can speak next.
We have a lot of the same issues here, and I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with Muskogee Nation. We're in eastern Oklahoma. We have just over 3 million acres in our reservation. And so we have Tulsa, part of Tulsa is in our reservation. So we have urban settings, but we also have rural settings with really small communities that are in food deserts that don't have, the infrastructure that they need. And so, yeah, the issues and our needs are really varying. A major issue with when we have started our EV journey here was that our citizens and our employees didn't feel comfortable with electric vehicles for varying reasons. There's not very much infrastructure here. So they had that range fear that so many of us have. But also a lot of our friends, family members, neighbors, they work in the oil and gas industry here in Oklahoma. And so that's something that we're all worried about. We want all of our friends and families to be employed. And so bringing jobs into the area, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with Canoe, they're moving out into Pryor, Oklahoma, coming to the area. So, but we want more of the jobs to be brought here, the clean energy, the electric vehicle installations, that kind of thing. I think that will help. Also, just having that be, about education, community outreach is something that's important here. Just being aware, or having our citizens, our communities aware that there are stations being put in. We put one here in our complex this past spring. We put in 3 dual level 2 chargers and 2 single arms. And I was honestly kind of on the fence. I was like, we're going to have like a great response, or, it's going to be my brother works for, oil gas industry, and I'm never going to, own a EV vehicle. But I was absolutely amazed. Before we even had our grand opening, our second chief went out and bought a Chevy Volt. And he's a big guy, and he was excited. So he has like a silver Chevy Volt, and he looks really cool with it. But yeah, so after that, I think so far we've had like 4 employees on our main complex buy EV vehicles, and they charge every day at work. And I may or may not have almost gotten a wreck when I saw them all parked and charging. Like, I was so excited to go run to take a picture and show everybody I knew. So we've had like great administration support. We've had, just as kind of like if you build it, they will come. That's what happened here. So our citizens, our employees are seeing that EV infrastructure here. They're having, that safety that I can charge all day and be able to drive that commute home. Like Shana was talking about, I drove an hour to work for the past 4 years one way. And so that's a big commute, and that's common. A lot of our employees commute in, and so that's a concern. And so we're happy to offer that service, and we're going to hopefully continue to expand that. We have a second charging station being installed in Tulsa at one of our hospitals that we have there. And so we're excited to get that project going. But you couldn't believe how much effort it took to get to that point. We just don't have a lot of familiarity with EVs and the EV infrastructure. So a lot of our facilities managers weren't comfortable having something like that installed at their business or their building. So it's kind of like, it's really going back to that education and exposure, the awareness as more people drive EVs and they're asking for this amenity. I think that's going to be important. Also, the cost is a challenge. Like they were saying, we're going to need that funding. We installed this charging station and our next one with the VW funding. So we probably would never have been able to install these at our complex without that funding. I hope that, we've had such a positive response that it's going to continue to grow, and people will realize the priority here, and that we're going to continue to prioritize clean air and clean energy. But so I think that's going to definitely be something that factors in, that we want to continue to see this funding. So I'm excited to see the opportunities with this new funding that Biden has approved. So hopefully we'll be able to expand that further and be able to provide that for our citizens as a service.
Let's see if I sound better. Is that good? Yes? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you all for providing a little bit more texture there on the equity issues. I mean, I used to do a lot of this work in California myself. And so ultimately what I'm, when I zoom out, right, and I hear all the different issues that you all are bringing up with respect to the communities that you work with, really what I'm hearing too is that, obviously, given that we are in the United States, that there are deeper entrenched historical issues related to just systemic problems in our society, right? I think, Shana, you brought up just the divestment in infrastructure, right? And just like transformers being outdated. And so there's like a compounding effect almost of like, when you want to talk about EVs and clean transportation in these communities, that's one thing, but it's one problem in a larger landscape of multiple problems that communities face due to systemic oppression that communities are facing. So it's always hard to just talk about the one issue, because we know that there's a lot of complexity in the issues that communities are facing. So thank you for sharing a little bit about what your communities are facing. I want to move us to one more question. I'm being mindful of time, and then we'll get in to see what some of the audience questions are coming up. But the next question I have is, there is this pattern that happens often, right, where well-intentioned outside stakeholders come into marginalized communities wanting to help, right? But sometimes instead end up perpetuating, problematic dynamics. And so, yeah, my question to the panel here is just, what guidance do you have for clean transportation stakeholders who want to collaborate and support Native communities and just don't have the expertise, the knowledge, or experience in working in communities? And again, knowing that, I think many of you have raised that, Native communities are diverse, that, they get lumped into this, umbrella of Indigenous communities, Native communities, but there are differences. And so wondering if you can speak a little bit to, specific guidance with respect to the Native nations that you all are involved with and represent. So maybe this time I'll start with Shana, Jennifer, and then Craig.
Can you ask, what was the question again?
Just if you can, just what guidance do you have for like outside stakeholders who are trying to come into Native communities to support and help without having to perpetuate some of the problematic stuff that we know happens when well-intentioned folks come in to try to help?
I think those that do that should walk in the community as a person introducing themselves. Most of the time, people walk in our communities and not be vulnerable and not be. They're more robotic and not really open, and that makes not only indigenous tribes uncomfortable, but like minority communities uncomfortable when you don't know the outsider and where they come from, and there's like lack of vulnerability from this stranger that's coming into your community asking to help. And I think what it is too is the emphasis of outsiders telling us our own story. Like, we know our own story. We know how bad it is. we know we already understand how bad things are, and we don't need that re-emphasized by people that are helping us. But they need to come into communities in a vulnerable state, introducing themselves and acknowledging where they come from and where their ancestors come from. And you're not just somebody from Michigan or Washington or Ohio or wherever. You're from somewhere. As Indigenous people, we acknowledge ourselves to the land. As non-Native people do not have that relationship. They assume that just stating who they are is enough for community to trust them. That we need real relationships between people. We need people that are able to build relationships and be a part of a relationship rather than being robotic and academic. Communities need human beings to interact with them, not academic professionals. We need people to actually hear us. And I think when I go into a Latino community that they speak all Spanish, they respect the way I introduce myself, saying who I am, where I'm from, where my people originally inhabited the lands, acknowledging my ancestral roots. They respect that it's not, I'm not just Shada from New Mexico, Four Corners, New Mexico, but I am Indigenous. I'm tribal affiliate. My people's land are within these within the Four Sacred Mountains. Because with the Navajo people, we have Four Sacred Mountains, where they fall in the lines of southern Colorado, western central of New Mexico, eastern Arizona, and there's sacred sites in Utah. And a lot of people don't know that. And when we have people coming into our communities and they can't even share a little history about themselves, it makes you not trust people. It makes you feel like you're in it for the company, you're in it for the money, you're in it just because you're collecting in some way and form, that you don't seem trustful and you're not really sincere about the work you're doing for our community. And that hasn't really helped tribal communities when strangers come in the community wanting to just push an agenda that they came up with. That's part of the problem that we've been having with government, is that we're told about the agenda that's coming to us. And we are not given a stakeholder presence in that decision, that we're just supposed to accept the agenda, basically. It's just like when in inner cities, when they eminent domain property, that community person that's being impacted by eminent domain doesn't have a say, but an agenda is pushed onto them because they rule that whatever agenda that is taking place is more important than their presence there. And that's what it feels like with the tribal community when these new agendas come to our communities. It's pushed onto us. We're not talked to as stakeholders of like, oh, well, what do you think of this before we do this? There wasn't ever that relationship. And I think healing that relationship is going to take a lot of education. And I always think if we're really going to make changes, we need to acknowledge where we're wrong at. And education is one of those things. And is part of like the boarding schools that were brought onto us. And unfortunately, that education is still dominant today, to where we're not preparing our students how to better prepare themselves and survive in their future. We are continuing to educate in a white nationalist structure that it doesn't acknowledge indigenous people or knowledge in a way that would benefit communities. And I think like if we're really going to change, like it starts with education, employment, government policies. Policy is the number one factor there that has been created invisible barriers and disenfranchises indigenous people as well as Black, brown, and immigrants that are trying to do better for the community. So I think that's what my thoughts are.
Thank you, Sheena. Jennifer?
Said that perfectly. Yeah, I think we're looking for genuine relationships, people that are genuine, that understand our resources, understand where our tribal nation is and our goals, and come to us with realistic ideas and partnerships. They're bringing something to the table, and they're, looking to work with us collaboratively, cooperatively to better our tribal nation, better our communities. Because we're here to serve our citizens, we're here to serve our communities. So we want to be able to do that to the best of our ability. And if a organization is coming to us, we want them to have that in their heart as well. That we want them to have that approach. That's what our goal is. We want it to be their goal as well. We get shopped a lot. We have people come to us all the time wanting to sell us, wanting to be our contractor, wanting to, like all the time. And so it's really important to have that relationship there, to have that understanding there. We've been really blessed with our projects. I don't know if it's just the Tulsa EV community or if it's the EV community as a whole. Everybody seems amazing on this conference. So maybe it's just the EV community is great. But yeah, so we've been really blessed with our partnerships, working on our electric vehicle charging station, working with the Tulsa EV Coalition. I talked about earlier about the Tulsa Clean Cities. They kind of work in partnership with INCOG. It's the Indian Nation Council of Governments here in Tulsa. They're amazing. They have done some great work. And so they come to us and, look to include us in projects, look to include us in planning. And I appreciate that. We appreciate that, they're making the effort to say, you're a partner in this community. What's your opinion? What do you think? What's best for your citizens? And I think that goes a long way for us. We really appreciate that. I don't know if you've seen me or heard me talk about Francis Energy, but they're the ones that we bought our chargers from, and they have been amazing since the very beginning phases of VW, which I know Craig can relate that was eons ago. I felt like it's been a decade, but in the very beginning, they were really great partners, being realistic of like what our resources were, what we were capable of doing, and not trying to oversell us or take advantage of us. And obviously, we didn't have a lot of experience, and we still don't in the EV world, but them being so genuine and great partners with us, really, they've educated us and just want the best for us. And that goes a long ways. So that we've been really fortunate and blessed. And, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from, like that just genuine, that like Shana was saying, that they understand our culture and they're respectful of that. And they're not looking to take advantage of that.
I think you're on mute, Craig.
I most definitely was. All right. Yeah, that I can't add much more to those two, because that's exactly what I was thinking as well. If you come in, you be yourself. You should be respectful. Learn as much as you can. We're going to trust you. As much as we need to, working and doing these projects. The further you communicate, become transparent, be a part of what we want to be a part of, that's where things just are blossom for those relationships. I get a lot more involved in those relationships from both the federal government side and sort of the industry side on Superfund work. Like Jennifer said, there's people that want to come and sell you on something all the time. Hey, we have a fix for all this contaminated waste. Okay, well, you're going to have to prove that to EPA, and it's going to cost money. And you never hear back from them. They don't want to sit down and learn the issues. They don't want to sit and kind of understand further, the process. It may take, while it may take a little bit of time and some money, it may be truly the fix in cleaning up, contaminated land. And if we're not seeing that from, say, our federal partners, what we can do and what we always ask for is, well, give us a seat at the table, give us money or give us a grant or something to build our own capacity. Tribes through EPA have the opportunity to do treatment as state, or treatment as sovereign is what we're calling it now, treatment as sovereign, and going after environmental programs and building our capacity to be able to implement and administer various environmental programs, not just air quality, water, anything, just all across the board, those environmental programs. If we don't feel like, the federal agency, the states, locals are taking it serious to where, we aren't benefiting from it, well, give us the opportunity. Let us have a seat at the table. We want to be a partner. We have the technical, people in place, the experience, the background. We have a vested interest in this land. Let us, take on responsibility. Trust us. We will communicate, be transparent along the way. We want what's best for this land, for these people. That's where we come about. Specific to a lot of the Superfund work, but we also, in our air quality work, our water quality work, when we can, we want a seat at the table. We're here for the tribe to, clean up the land, have good, clean waters for our tribal citizens to, go to and capture and collect and utilize those resources in and around the water. The Quapaw are the downstream people, they go to water to, collect and utilize, all kinds of resources. So those are some of the big points. We talk about, being confident, having those partners. Well, that was one of the big reasons here with Quapaws and the Tar Creek Superfund side as a federal agency. And there was a question I might be able to answer on sovereign immunity, waiving sovereign immunity for grants. I mean, if it's a federal grant, the federal government has to uphold the trust responsibilities to each and individual tribe. They can't have you waive your sovereign immunity to receive a grant. So whoever's trying to, work that, no, I mean, you just don't even go after those monies, I would say. I mean, that's just not, the federal government cannot waive your sovereign immunity to receive, federal dollars. That's a trust responsibility that the federal government has with each individual tribe. So, we've had that here on Quapaw land with this Superfund site. The Bureau of Indian Affairs deemed tribal members incompetent of managing their own land. So they signed mining leases on their behalf. Well, the federal government now is a responsible party to cleaning up this land because of that. They didn't think these tribal members were competent. Well, they were. We are. Work with us. We're here. We have this land, Quapaw land, I'm getting into Quapaw stuff, but their land was taken from them, like Shane had said. Jennifer, we've talked about, they've walked those walks, they've ceded land, but that was all part of this federal trust, that we now have, and where Quapaw is located in Northeast Oklahoma. This is our land. It's vested interest in getting it cleaned up. We need to work. You need to work with us to do that. We can't talk enough about that sometimes, and upholding that trust responsibility that the federal government has towards any tribe and doing what they know and what is best for their people and what's best for their land, because it, like Shana said, it goes back to that land. It's the tribe's land. It's those individual members' land to take care of. So
thank you all. I'm going to take a little bit of moderator's privilege here to kind of just summarize a little bit what I've heard, and then we'll get into one audience question. I think we have time for one of the Q&A questions before we wrap up. And I think, yeah, there was so much there. And as I was writing down the notes, like two concepts kind of emerged for me in terms of like the guidance that you all have. And one is just like the human ritual of just building genuine relationship and connection, right? I think it's just important, and I hear you all said it in multiple ways, but just this idea of coming in to learn, to share about yourself as a human, your culture, your people, and just look for that connection, not come in with an agenda. And then the other thing that I heard you both say, or you all say, is basically what I call radical solidarity, right? Is that folks coming in to not push their specific agenda, but again, to follow the self-determined needs of community and do what they can to be in service to that, versus coming in with their prescribed solutions or their agenda that they're trying to push or the thing that they're trying to sell to you. So if it sounds like if outside stakeholders at least do two of those things, you're already kind of starting on the right foot with communities. So with that, I'll transition us. Craig, you kind of already tackled a little bit of the sovereign immunity question here, but I think I'm looking at one that seems important, especially as you all kind of brought up federal funds and the Biden administration. So I'm gonna read out Jeff Allen's question, and feel free to jump in. But basically the question is, what kinds of support will tribes need to be able to access federal funds for EV charging and other transportation and electrification projects? Where would you typically look for that support? So whoever wants to start, feel free to start, and we'll go around the horn, but I do want to say be mindful of the time. We have about 11 minutes left. So who wants to take a first crack at that?
I can go ahead and crack at that. So with Mobs Clean Airports, we speak with legislators or governments at every level, whether it's federal, state, or local, and those are the leaders that we're trying to influence to be better, to have better government to government relationships with tribes. In my big world, I don't think we're there yet, because tribes have not been invited as equal partners as these colonial governments have already established, having their presence at the table, like deciding on the infrastructure or bill. Tribes should be at the seat as well as there. So we're not there yet. So I think when you're asking that question, we need support of pushing those leaders to have those government to government relationships with tribes, and to being to upholding that relationship as by law. They're already required to have that relationship with tribes, and with that, like that's why we're asking for ally support, because we do need every legislator member, every government member to acknowledge indigenous rights, to acknowledge tribes, tribal governments. With my work here in Colorado, I've learned, because I've been doing a lot of work on raising indigenous acknowledgement in the state of Colorado, and with that work, it's showing the Ute tribe have been given a lot of attention by the government in our state of Colorado, but other states that they border with, those governments haven't really reached out to tribal communities. For example, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe has been reached out by the Colorado government more often than any other, like no other state has reached out to them before. But since I've been doing my work, they have noticed that the government has been reaching out to them about having this relationships with tribes and acknowledging the stolen land, which we're still not at that point where they 100% acknowledge indigenous lands. But I think if you're going to ask for funding for tribes, we need to actually be decision makers in there for these funding rules that are going on, like the infrastructure. Tribes should have been there as voters too, and to uphold that government to government relationship. And we're still not there. For that, through the NTAA Moms Partnership, we're able to help boost robust funding for tribes, as well as many other organizers have been pushing for funding for tribes. But we really pushed for funding, which a lot of funding went increased for air programs for tribes now after we've been promoting that petition to boost robust funding for EPA funds to tribes. So it's working, it's slow, but we still need more allyship to support our government to, or what Craig said. What did you say? Treatment of sovereignty. That's what we need. We need that support in order to have more of a leadership role as indigenous communities into this as stakeholders and equal status as other state governments have, that are, which I would consider as foreign governments on tribal lands, because they are they're not from the lands. And so with that, I would say support tribes being acknowledged and having that relationship with government at federal, state, and local. These agencies should be having these relationships with tribal communities already, but haven't been fulfilling that responsibility.
Jennifer, Craig, is there anything you want to, thank you, Sheena, you want to add there?
I think I was on mute, but just quick, I think I've seen in the chat a lot of, DOE, and I think there's an energy office or something over at DOE that has been supportive throughout the years. We've tried to receive a few grants, and we'll continue to try to support our efforts here, in building out some, more renewable, forms of power for the Quapaw land. But EPA, with when we're talking about transportation, EPA is where we typically look towards, and if it's in air quality or with this Volkswagen settlement, actually generated EPA to start within their DERA program, their Diesel Emissions Reduction Act program, to actually put no match requirement for tribes. And with that, there was a tribal set aside under DERA, which was the first time they did both that of a set aside and no match requirement, which is huge for tribes. That was one of the biggest impediments for tribes in going after grant money is a match. You're looking at 20 to 40% of that grant having to be matched by a tribe that just, there's just no talk. The conversation stops at that point when the question's asked, is there a match? Yes, it's 40%. Okay, let's move on. But when EPA, starts to hear from the tribes, and, NTA in the executive committees really pushed on, hey, you'll get a lot of interest. The tribes are for this. They have the capacity to do these programs, these projects. But it's just the match requirement that always kind of throws up, hands, and, they move on. So providing those incentives that require no match is where a lot of need is, and I think EPA sees some of that with this DERA stuff. There's a school bus rebate program now. If that can transition into just, you know, a grant for tribes to go after money to replace school buses without the rebate to it, you know, and just replacing, I think it'll go a long ways. And maybe this infrastructure bill and maybe funding down the road will get there. So that's the hope.
Thank you, Craig. Jennifer, I don't know if you definitely want to leave space for you if there's anything else you want to add before we kind of do a close here.
Craig, the cost share is one of the main obstacles when we are looking at that, like the DOE funds. Those are some big projects that we would love to do, but yeah, we don't have that match. And I know they reduced it this past year, but there's still just very few projects that they're going to fund with that as well. And you know, it's a struggle for us to put all the time and effort into a proposal and the money that goes into that. And they're only going to fund 6 projects, and you still have to have a 40% match. That's just not realistic for us, unfortunately. We're looking at, are we going to feed our citizens, or are we going to, you know, do this project? And that's what it comes down to, unfortunately. But we're hopefully going to continue to do the good work that we do and just try to persevere.
Great. Well, we have 2 minutes left. I just want to say thank you again for sharing your time with us. And in terms of, yeah, we're wrapping up this session. So please feel free to move into our networking sessions during the break. You can access the one-on-one random networking feature on the left tab by clicking networking, or choosing one of the larger networking rooms by going back to the sessions tab and selecting a networking room. So with that, yes, thanks again. Lots of good nuggets there. And I know that we didn't get to all the questions. So I think there might be a process from the conference organizers where we'll be collecting those, and at least that's what I anticipate might happen. So for those that you didn't get your questions answered, maybe someone's collecting those and hopefully get some responses to you. But with that, thanks again, and enjoy your networking, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks all.